Pick up your rags and get out. And take that little charity case daughter of yours with you. I want you off my property within the hour." Mrs. van der Hoven stood at the top of the marble staircase, looking down at me with those same cold, dead eyes I'd seen every morning for 25 years. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and she already had a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. Her silk robe flowed around her like a judge's robes as she delivered my sentence. My crime? I'd dropped a porcelain plate. One plate. After 25 years of raising her children, scrubbing her toilets, ironing her sheets, and keeping her darkest secrets, I was being thrown out over a piece of porcelain worth less than the shoes she was wearing. But I didn't cry as I folded my apron for the last time. I didn't beg. I looked up at the portrait of Mr. van der Hoven hanging in the hallway, the man who'd suffered a massive stroke 3 days ago and was currently lying in a coma at New York's finest hospital. Mrs. van der Hoven thought she was finally queen of the castle. She thought she was cleaning house. What she didn't know was that the charity case daughter she despised had eyes. And I carried in my pocket a document that would turn her world to ash. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever seen karma hit someone so hard it left a mark? Because you're about to. My name is Elena. I'm 48 years old. For 25 of those years, I've been the invisible ghost in the van der Hoven family's Hamptons estate. I was 23 when I started, fresh out of the city, desperate for work. Richard van der Hoven was charming, lonely in a marriage that was more business merger than relationship, and, for one brief, foolish summer, he was kind to me. It only happened a few times. A stolen moment in the library. A conversation in the garden that went on too long. And then reality hit. He was a billionaire employer. I was the help. When I found out I was pregnant, I packed my bags to leave. But Richard stopped me. He begged me to stay. He promised that if I could keep quiet, keep working, and keep raising the child when it came, we'd be taken care of. He moved us into the carriage house on the edge of the property. So I stayed. I became the live-in housekeeper. I raised my daughter Maya in the shadow of the main house. Maya grew up watching the van der Hoven children from a distance, tripping over the expensive toys they discarded, studying from second-hand books at the kitchen table. She was brilliant. She got into Yale on a full scholarship, not because of Richard's money, but because she had a fire in her belly that none of his legitimate children possessed. But Mrs. van der Hoven, Clarissa, hated her. She hated Maya with such passion that it only made sense to me. She saw the resemblance. She saw the intelligence. She saw the threat. For years, Clarissa made our lives hell. She'd make me scrub the porch in the pouring rain. She'd accuse Maya of stealing silverware when a fork went missing, only to find it in her own purse later. I swallowed my pride. I bit my tongue until it bled. I did it for Maya. I did it because Richard, in his cowardly way, kept the peace. But 3 days ago, Richard had his stroke. The doctors said he probably wouldn't wake up. And the moment the ambulance pulled out of the driveway, Clarissa's mask fell off. She started liquidating. She started firing staff. And today, she came for me. Let me take you back further, though. Because this story doesn't really start with a broken plate. It starts 26 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in late June. I remember it was a Tuesday because that was the day the fish market delivered fresh lobster to the estate. I was in the kitchen, helping the head cook, a woman named Dorothy who'd been with the family for 40 years, prepare for one of Clarissa's infamous dinner parties. I'd only been working there for 3 weeks, still learning where everything was kept, still trying to stay invisible. Richard walked in through the back door, his tie loosened, jacket slung over his shoulder. He looked exhausted. I'd learn later that he'd been in merger negotiations for months, trying to acquire a tech startup that would eventually make him another billion. At that moment, though, he just looked like a man who needed a glass of water and a moment of peace. "Elena, right?" he asked, and I nearly dropped the colander I was holding. In 3 weeks, none of the van der Hovens had spoken directly to me except to give orders. The children ignored me completely. Clarissa spoke about me, not to me. "Tell her to clean the third-floor bathroom or she needs to polish the silver again, I can see fingerprints." "Yes, sir," I said, keeping my eyes down the way Dorothy had taught me. "You can call me Richard." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "How are you settling in?" We talked for maybe 10 minutes. He asked about where I was from, Queens, a neighborhood he'd probably never set foot in. He asked if my room in the staff quarters was comfortable. He noticed I'd been reading a book in the sunroom during my break the day before and asked about it. It was a conversation. A real conversation, like I was a person, not just a piece of furniture that occasionally moved. Dorothy gave me a look when he left. "Be careful with that one," she said, chopping onions with quick, efficient movements. "He's charming when he wants to be. And his wife knows it." I should have listened. But over the next few weeks, those conversations continued. I'd be dusting the library, and he'd come in, pour himself a scotch, and ask about my day. I'd be trimming roses in the garden, and he'd wander out, supposedly checking on the landscaping, and we'd talk about books, about the city, about everything except his unhappy marriage and my impossible crush. Because that's what it was. I was 23 years old, working 80-hour weeks, living in a room smaller than the van der Hoven's walk-in closet. And this handsome, intelligent, kind man was paying attention to me. I knew it was stupid. I knew it was dangerous. But when you've been invisible your whole life, being seen is intoxicating. It happened in late August, during a thunderstorm that knocked out the power. The family was supposed to be in the city, there was a charity gala, but Richard had stayed behind, claiming he had work to finish. I was in the library, reading by candlelight, thinking I was alone. When he walked in, we were both startled. "I didn't know anyone was here," we said at the same time, and then laughed. He sat down in the chair across from me. We talked. We drank wine from the cellar, a bottle that probably cost more than I made in a month. And when the candles burned low and the storm raged outside, something shifted. He reached across and took my hand. "I know this is wrong," he said. "I know I shouldn't." "Then don't," I said, even though my heart was hammering. But he did. And so did I. It happened 3 more times over the next month. Always rushed, always tinged with guilt and fear of getting caught. I told myself stories to justify it, that he was unhappy, that his marriage was basically over, that maybe, somehow, this could turn into something real. I was an idiot. When I missed my period in October, I knew immediately. I'd always been regular as clockwork. I bought a pregnancy test at a drugstore 2 towns over, too terrified someone local would see me and word would get back to Clarissa. When both lines appeared, I sat on the bathroom floor of my tiny room and cried for an hour. I packed my things that night. I was going to slip away before dawn, disappear into the city, figure it out on my own. But Richard must have seen my light on. He knocked on my door at 2 in the morning. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing my bags. I told him. I watched his face go through a dozen emotions: shock, fear, panic, calculation. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I felt my heart sink. Then he sat down on my bed and put his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "God, Elena, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should never have." "It takes two," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll leave. You don't have to worry. I won't tell anyone. I'll just go." "No." He looked up at me, and there was something fierce in his eyes. "No, don't go. I want to help. I want to be there for this child." "You're married," I said. "You have a family." "I know. But that doesn't mean I'm going to abandon you. Let me figure something out. Please. Just give me a week." That week turned into a month of hushed conversations and secret meetings. Richard met with lawyers. He set up a bank account in my name with money that appeared every month like clockwork. He moved me from the staff quarters into the carriage house, a small but charming two-bedroom that had been used for storage. To everyone else, it was explained as giving me more space since I'd proven to be such a valuable employee. Only Dorothy looked at me with knowing eyes. "You're making a deal with the devil," she told me one morning, watching me sort through baby clothes Richard had secretly had delivered. "You think he's going to take care of you, but men like him don't leave their wives. They just keep everyone comfortable enough not to make waves." She was right, of course. But what choice did I have? I was pregnant, alone, and terrified. At least this way, my child would have food, shelter, a roof over her head. I told myself I was being practical, not foolish. Maya was born in May, in a private hospital 3 towns over. Richard was there for the birth, holding my hand, tears streaming down his face when he first held his daughter. For one perfect moment, I let myself believe in fairy tales. Then he went home to Clarissa and his legitimate family, and I took my baby girl back to the carriage house. The first few years weren't so bad. Maya was a happy, healthy baby. Richard visited us when he could, which wasn't often, but he was genuinely involved. He'd sneak over after dinner, read to Maya, change her diapers, act like a real father for stolen moments before returning to play the role of faithful husband. Clarissa must have suspected something, but she never said anything directly. Instead, she watched. She waited. And when Maya was old enough to toddle into the main house, following me while I worked, that's when the real torture began. "That child smells," Clarissa would announce, wrinkling her nose, even though I'd just bathed Maya. "Keep her outside. Why is she always underfoot? Can't you control your daughter? Tell me, Elena, who's the father? Some gardener? The pool boy? I'm just curious how you could be so careless." The jabs were constant, designed to remind me of my place. But worse was how she treated Maya. She'd instruct her own children, Stephanie, Bradley, and little Olivia, not to play with the help's daughter. When Maya was 6, she made Stephanie's birthday cake, a beautiful princess cake that took me hours. Maya asked if she could have a small slice. Clarissa smiled sweetly and said, "Of course not, dear. This is for real family members. But you can have the scraps when we're done." I found Maya crying in the carriage house later, and it took everything in me not to march back to the main house and tell Clarissa exactly what I thought of her. But I couldn't. Because Richard had made it clear, keep the peace, stay quiet, and Maya would be taken care of. Make waves, and we'd have nothing. So I bit my tongue. I held my daughter when she cried. I told her she was just as good as any van der Hoven, better even, because she had something they'd never have, a mother who actually loved her. Maya grew up in that strange in-between world. Not part of the family, but not entirely separate either. She watched Stephanie take writing lessons and begged me to teach her. I found YouTube videos and we practiced in the empty pasture. She saw Bradley get a tutor for SAT prep. I took on extra cleaning jobs in town and paid for practice books. She observed Olivia's grand sweet 16 party. We celebrated hers with cupcakes from the supermarket, just the two of us in our little house. But here's the thing about Maya, she never let any of it make her bitter. She watched, she learned, and she worked harder than any of those Hoven kids ever did. While Stephanie was failing out of her third college, Maya was earning straight A's at the public school. While Bradley was crashing his third BMW, Maya was studying for scholarships. While Olivia was getting her stomach pumped at some Manhattan club, Maya was volunteering at the soup kitchen. Richard saw it too. I'd catch him watching Maya sometimes, when she didn't know he was there, and there'd be this look on his face, pride mixed with sadness. He knew what he'd created. A brilliant daughter he couldn't claim. A child who had more integrity in her little finger than his legitimate heirs had in their whole bodies. When Maya was 16, something shifted. She came home from school one day with this determined look on her face. "Mom," she said, "I figured it out." "Figured what out, honey?" "Why Mrs. Hoven hates me so much. Why she's always watching me. Why she makes those comments about how I have dad's, Mr. Hoven's, eyes." My heart stopped. "Maya. It's okay. I'm not stupid. I've always known something was off. And honestly, it makes sense. He's the only one who's ever been kind to me. The only one who asks about school, who remembers my birthday, who actually sees me." I started to cry. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to grow up like this. I wanted to give you a real family, a real home." "Mom, stop." She hugged me tight. "You did give me a real home. You gave me everything. And you know what? I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to go to a great college, get a great job, and someday, we're going to have our own place. A real place. Where nobody makes you scrub floors or treats us like we're invisible." She kept that promise. 4 years later, she opened her acceptance letter from Yale. Full scholarship. Richard tried to give me money to help with expenses, but Maya refused it. "I got here on my own," she told him. "I don't need Hoven money. That's my girl." But that also made Clarissa hate her even more. Because Maya was proof that you didn't need money or connections or a fancy last name to be extraordinary. You just needed to work hard and refuse to be broken. Which brings us back to 3 days ago, when everything changed. Richard collapsed in his office. Massive stroke. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was unconscious. They rushed him to Mount Sinai, where the doctors gave us the news: severe brain damage, unlikely to recover, possibly brain dead. The next few days would tell. Clarissa didn't cry. She made phone calls. To lawyers, to accountants, to real estate agents. I heard her on the phone that first night, her voice cold and calculating. "Yes, I want a valuation on the Hamptons property. And the penthouse. I need to know what's liquid and what's tied up. No, I don't think he's waking up. Start the paperwork." She started firing people the next day. The gardener who'd been there for 15 years. The night security guard. 2 of the housemaids. All with the same line: "We're downsizing." You understand. I knew I was next. But I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd let Maya and me stay in the carriage house. We'd been there for 25 years. Surely that counted for something. I was wrong. And that brings us to this morning, to the broken plate, to Clarissa standing at the top of the stairs with her glass of wine and her silk robe, telling me to pack my bags and take my charity-case daughter with me. But here's what Clarissa didn't know. 5 years ago, Richard came to me with papers to sign. Legal documents. He said he was setting up a trust for Maya, something that would kick in automatically if he became incapacitated or died. He made me promise not to tell anyone, not even Maya. It was insurance, he said. In case something happened. In case Clarissa tried to cut us off. I signed the papers. I tucked the copies away in a safe deposit box in town, along with other documents Richard had given me over the years. Including a DNA test proving Maya was his daughter. I never thought I'd need them. I thought maybe Richard would wake up, that life would go on, that Maya and I would quietly fade into the background like we always had. But when Clarissa told me to get out, when she called my daughter garbage, when she said she was erasing every trace of us, something inside me snapped. 25 years of silence. 25 years of swallowing my pride. 25 years of watching my brilliant daughter be treated like trash. It was time for Clarissa to learn the truth. And as I stood at the bottom of those marble stairs, reaching into my apron pocket for that envelope, I felt something I hadn't felt in 25 years. Power. I heard you just fine, Clarissa, I said, my voice steady as I slowly climbed the marble staircase. You said get out. You said take my charity case daughter with me. You said you want every trace of us erased. I stopped 2 steps below her. Not at the top, not at her level. Just close enough that she had to look at me, really look at me, for maybe the first time in 25 years. I'm not going anywhere. Clarissa laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound that echoed through the foyer. Excuse me? You're fired, Elena. You have no rights here. You're a housekeeper. A servant. You live in my property, you work in my house, and when I say you're done, you're done. I was a housekeeper, I corrected her. But my daughter? She's not. I pulled the envelope from my apron pocket. It wasn't thick, just a few folded papers, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 25 years of secrets. 25 years of silence. All contained in a few sheets of paper. What is that supposed to be? Clarissa's eyes narrowed, but I saw something flicker there. Uncertainty. Fear, maybe. This, I said, holding it up, is the reason you should have been nicer to us. She snatched it from my hand with those perfectly manicured fingers, the ones that had never scrubbed a floor or washed a dish. I watched her unfold the papers. I watched her eyes scan the first page, the DNA test, Richard's name and Maya's name clearly printed, the percentages that don't lie. 99.9% probability of paternity. Her face went white under all that expensive bronzer. This is a forgery, she stammered. This is insane. Richard would never. Keep reading, I said quietly. She flipped to the second page, and this is where I saw her hands start to shake. The trust document. Official, notarized, updated annually for the past 5 years. I'd watched Richard sign the most recent version just 8 months ago, when he'd had some scare with his blood pressure and decided it was time to get everything in order. Her lips moved as she read, but no sound came out at first. Then, in a whisper, the property at 42 Meadow Lane and all liquid assets in the Van der Hoven family trust shall transfer immediately to the beneficiary upon my incapacitation. Keep going, I urged. The good part's coming. Her eyes dropped to the next line, and I saw the exact moment it hit her. The moment she understood. The wine glass slipped from her fingers and exploded on the marble floor, red liquid spreading like blood across the white stone I'd polished 1,000 times. Beneficiary, Mia Elena Santos. Biological daughter. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. The house isn't yours anymore, Clarissa, I said, and my voice echoed through the grand entrance hall. It's Maya's. That girl you called garbage this morning? She's your landlord now. Clarissa looked at me, then at the door, then back at the papers, as if she could make the words rearrange themselves into something that made sense in her world. A world where she was the queen and I was nothing. He couldn't do this to me. I'm his wife. I've been his wife for 30 years. You've been his tax write-off for 30 years, I corrected. You signed a prenup, remember? The one that said if either of you cheated, the other got nothing from the marriage assets. You were so confident you'd be the faithful one, weren't you? So sure Richard would be the one to slip up and you'd take him for everything. Her eyes went even wider. But he did slip up. He cheated with you. That's true, I nodded. But funny thing about that prenup, Richard's lawyer was smarter than yours. The infidelity clause works both ways. And about 5 years ago, Richard found some very interesting photos of you and a tennis instructor in Monaco. Remember him? Enrique, I think his name was? Clarissa grabbed the railing. For a second, I thought she might actually faint. But here's the kicker, I continued, and I admit, I was enjoying this now. 25 years of humiliation, and I was finally getting to speak my truth. Even if you'd been faithful, even if Richard had been the only one who strayed, you still wouldn't get this house. Because he transferred it into the trust 10 years ago. Technically, this property hasn't belonged to either of you for a decade. It was being held for Maya. He just never told you. Why? The word came out as a sob. Why would he do this? Because he knew you, I said simply. He knew that the minute he couldn't speak for himself, you'd try to liquidate everything and run. He knew you hated Maya and me. He knew you'd throw us out the second you had the chance. So he made sure you couldn't. Behind me, I heard the heavy oak front door open. I didn't turn around, but I knew who it was. I'd made the calls that morning, right after Clarissa had fired me. Mrs. van der Hoven. That was George Henderson, the family attorney. His footsteps clicked across the marble. I see Elena has informed you of the situation. Clarissa spun around, and for a moment she looked like her old self, imperious, demanding, in control. George. Thank God you're here. This woman has lost her mind. She's trying to claim that Richard gave her the house, that her bastard daughter has legal ownership of this property. Yes, George interrupted smoothly. I have the paperwork here. Everything's in order. Richard set this up years ago and updated it regularly. I tried to advise him against it, suggested it might cause complications, but he was quite insistent. Next to George stood Maya, and my heart swelled with pride. She wore a simple navy blazer and black pants, nothing fancy, nothing designer, but she looked more regal than Clarissa ever had in her Chanel and Dior. She carried a leather briefcase, and her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She looked like what she was, a third-year law student who'd just inherited a fortune. She looked like someone who belonged here. Hello, Clarissa, Maya said, her voice calm and professional. I think we need to have a conversation about next steps. Next steps? Clarissa's voice rose to a shriek. The next step is calling the police. This is fraud. This is. This is completely legal, George said firmly. I have copies of everything. The trust documents, the DNA test, the property transfer papers, all of it. Would you like to review them with your own attorney? You're certainly welcome to. My attorney, Clarissa repeated dumbly. She looked around the foyer as if seeing it for the first time, or maybe for the last time. This is my home. Not anymore, Maya said, not unkindly. But you're not going to be homeless, if that's what you're worried about. The townhouse in the city is still in your name. Dad made sure of that. The townhouse? Clarissa laughed, but it sounded slightly hysterical. That tiny thing? It's barely 1,500 square feet. It's 3,000 square feet, I corrected. And it's on the Upper East Side. Most people would be grateful. Most people aren't me. She grabbed George's arm. Do something. I'm his wife. Doesn't that count for anything? George gently removed her hand from his sleeve. Mrs. van der Hoven, I've been the van der Hoven family attorney for 23 years. I helped draft the original prenuptial agreement. I witnessed Richard set up this trust. And I'm here today because he specifically instructed me, years ago, that if he ever became incapacitated and unable to communicate, I was to ensure this trust was executed immediately. This is what he wanted. But why? Clarissa's voice broke. I gave him 30 years of my life. I gave him children. I stood by him. For the first time, I felt something almost like pity for her. Almost. You gave him 3 children you barely raised, I said. Nannies raised them. Boarding schools raised them. You were too busy with charity galas and shopping trips and affairs with tennis instructors. You stood by him at parties and fundraisers, sure, but when did you last have a real conversation with him? When did you last ask him how he was feeling, what he was thinking, whether he was happy? Tears were running down her face now, taking her makeup with them. She looked older suddenly, smaller. You don't understand. I loved him. In my own way, I did. Maybe you did, I acknowledged. But you hated us more. And that's what Richard couldn't forgive. He could live with a loveless marriage. He'd done it for 30 years. But watching you torture his daughter, watching you treat Maya like she was garbage, that was too much. Maya stepped forward then, and I saw something in her face that reminded me so much of Richard. That same quiet determination, that same moral clarity. Clarissa, I don't want to make this harder than it has to be, she said. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings from the house. George has prepared an inventory of items that belong to the estate versus items that are your personal property. You can take your clothes, your jewelry, your personal items. The furniture, the art, the collections, those stay with the house. 48 hours? Clarissa's voice was barely a whisper now. The townhouse is ready for you, Maya continued. It's been maintained, it's furnished, and it's yours free and clear. The utilities are on. You can move in today if you'd like. What about money? How am I supposed to live? George cleared his throat. Your personal accounts remain yours, of course. And as per the prenuptial agreement, you're entitled to a monthly allowance of $15,000 for living expenses. 15,000? Clarissa looked like she'd been slapped. I spend that on clothes in a month. Then I suggest you adjust your budget, Maya said coolly. It's more than most people make in a year. You'll be fine. I watched Clarissa crumble then. All that hauteur, all that arrogance, all that casual cruelty, it just dissolved. She sank down onto the marble steps, her silk robe pooling around her, and sobbed. Real, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Part of me wanted to comfort her. 25 years of proximity, even hostile proximity, creates a strange sort of bond. But the larger part of me, the part that remembered every slight, every insult, every time she'd made Maya cry, that part stayed right where I was. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. Everyone will know. Everyone will talk. I'll be humiliated. Yes, I agreed. You will be. But you'll live through it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something about how it feels to be on the other side of contempt. Maya knelt down then, and I was proud of her for that small kindness. She didn't have to. After everything Clarissa had done to her, to us, Maya didn't owe her anything. But my daughter has always been better than her circumstances. Clarissa, she said gently, I know this is a shock. I know it's not what you expected. But this is how it's going to be. You can accept it with grace, or you can fight it and drag everything out and make it uglier than it has to be. Either way, the outcome is the same. Clarissa looked up at her, mascara streaking her face. You're so much like him, she said, and I couldn't tell if it was an accusation or an observation. Those eyes. That stubborn set to your jaw. How did I not see it? You did see it, Maya said. You just didn't want to admit what it meant. George stepped forward with his briefcase. Mrs. van der Hoven, I have some papers for you to sign. Just acknowledgement that you've been informed of the trust execution, that you understand the terms, that you agree to vacate the premises. It's all very standard. Clarissa stood up slowly, holding onto the railing. She looked at the papers George held out, then at Maya, then at me. Did you plan this? She asked me. Did you scheme for 25 years, just waiting for this moment? No, I said honestly. I didn't plan anything. I was just trying to survive, trying to raise my daughter, trying to get through each day without you breaking us. Richard planned this. He saw who you really were, and he planned for it. She took the pen from George with shaking hands and signed the papers. Each signature seemed to take something out of her, like she was signing away pieces of herself. Where will you go? Maya asked when she was done. Do you want us to arrange for movers? For help packing? Clarissa straightened her spine then, trying to gather some shred of dignity. I can manage on my own, thank you. I've been managing on my own for 30 years, despite what you might think. Fair enough, Maya said. The offer stands if you change your mind. Clarissa walked past us toward the grand staircase that led to the second floor where her bedroom suite was. She paused at the bottom step and turned back. Elena, she said, and her voice was different now. Quieter. Almost human. Did he ever love me? At all? It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the years. Had Richard loved Clarissa in the beginning? Or had it always been a transaction, a merger of families and fortunes? I think he did, I said finally, because even after everything, I couldn't bring myself to take that from her. Once. A long time ago. Before things got complicated. She nodded slowly, then continued up the stairs. We watched her climb, this woman who'd been queen of her castle for 30 years, now ascending to pack her bags like any other evicted tenant. When she disappeared from view, Maya turned to me with wide eyes. Mom, she breathed. Did that really just happen? I pulled her into a hug. That really just happened. George cleared his throat discreetly. I should mention, there are some other matters to discuss. The staff, for instance. With the transfer of ownership, their employment technically shifts to you, Miss Santos. You'll need to decide what you want to do about that. Maya and I had talked about this already, in the 3 days since Richard's stroke, once I'd explained everything to her. Once I'd finally told her about the trust, about Richard's planning, about the safety net he'd woven for us over the years. I want to give everyone a week off, Maya said. Paid. They've been through a lot with Dad's illness and with Clarissa firing people. They deserve a break. After that, anyone who wants to stay on can, with a 20% raise across the board. George raised his eyebrows but nodded approvingly. That's very generous. I'll arrange it. And the property itself? Do you plan to live here? Maya looked around the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier, its marble floors, its air of old money and older secrets. I saw her taking it all in, this house where she'd grown up in the shadows, where she'd been made to feel small and unwanted. No, she said finally. I don't think so. I'll stay for a little while, help Mom settle things, make sure the transition is smooth. But long-term? This place has too many ghosts. Wise decision, George said. If you decide to sell, the property is currently valued at approximately $45 million. With the market as it is, we could likely get more. $45 million. The number hung in the air like a dream. Maya squeezed my hand. Let's take it one step at a time, she said. First things first, Mom, you should move into the house proper. No more carriage house for you. I shook my head immediately. Maya, no. This is your house now. I can't. You're right, it's my house, she interrupted with a smile. Which means I get to decide. And I decide that my mother, who spent 25 years living in a glorified shed while cleaning this mansion, gets to live in the actual mansion. At least for now. I started to cry then. Couldn't help it. 25 years of holding it together, of being strong, of telling myself it was all worth it for Maya's sake, it all just poured out. Okay, I managed. Okay, yes. George excused himself shortly after, promising to be in touch with more paperwork and details. Maya and I stood in the foyer, just the two of us, surrounded by all that marble and crystal and wealth. Do you want to look around? Maya asked. Pick out a bedroom? In a minute, I said. First, I want to just stand here. In the front of the house. Not in the service entrance. Not in the back halls. Right here, where guests stand. So we did. We stood in the grand foyer, in the late morning light streaming through the stained glass windows, and we just existed in that space. No aprons. No cleaning supplies. No whispered conversations about staying out of sight. Mom, Maya said after a while, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it? Any of it? I thought about that question. 25 years of my life, spent in service to a family that didn't respect me. 25 years of loving a man I could never really have. 25 years of watching my daughter be treated as less than. I regret that you had to grow up the way you did, I said honestly. I regret that you were hurt. I regret that you felt invisible. But do I regret having you? Do I regret the choices that led to you? Not for a second. She hugged me then, hard, and I heard her voice muffled against my shoulder. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. More than you'll ever know. We were interrupted by a sound from upstairs, something heavy being dragged across the floor. Clarissa was packing. The reality of our new situation was settling in. Should we help her? Maya asked. No, I said. Let her do this herself. She needs to. And so we did. We went to the kitchen, that kitchen where I'd spent thousands of hours preparing meals I'd never eat at the family table, and I made us sandwiches. Simple ones, with deli meat and cheese from the massive fridge. We sat at the kitchen island, on the side where I'd always stood to work, and we ate. Through the window, I could see the carriage house where we'd lived for so long. It looked smaller from here, less significant than it had always seemed when it was our whole world. What are you thinking? Maya asked. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that sometimes the universe has a strange way of evening things out. Not always. Not often enough. But sometimes. Karma, Maya said with a slight smile. Karma, I agreed. From upstairs, we heard the sound of Clarissa's designer luggage being rolled down the hallway. The sound of a life being packed up. The sound of an ending. But for Maya and me? It was just the beginning. Clarissa left the next morning. I'd half expected her to fight it, to drag things out, to make some grand dramatic stand. But when Maya and I came down for breakfast, in the main house, sitting at the family dining table for the first time ever, we found the front door standing open and Clarissa's Mercedes loaded to the roof with Louis Vuitton luggage. She was struggling with the last piece, a massive trunk that must have weighed 50 pounds. Her hair was unwashed, pulled into a messy ponytail. She wore yoga pants and a sweatshirt. I'd never seen her in anything so casual. No makeup. No jewelry except her wedding ring, which caught the morning light as she heaved the trunk toward her car. Do you want help? Maya asked from the doorway. Clarissa jumped, nearly dropping the trunk on her foot. She looked at us for a long moment, and I saw her eyes were red and swollen from crying. No, she said finally. I've got it. It took her 3 tries to lift the trunk into the back seat. A year ago, she would have snapped her fingers and had someone else do it. Now she did it herself, sweating and cursing under her breath. When she finally slammed the car door, she leaned against it for a moment, breathing hard. I called the townhouse, she said, not looking at us. They said the heat isn't working. And there's a leak in the master bathroom. I'll have someone look at it today, Maya said. Send me the details. How generous of you, Clarissa said, and there was a flash of her old venom. But it died quickly, replaced by exhaustion. I called my children. Did you know that? Called all 3 of them to tell them what happened. What did they say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Stephanie asked if I could still pay for her apartment in Soho. Bradley said he always knew Dad was having an affair, he just didn't care enough to figure out with who. And Olivia, her voice cracked slightly, Olivia said maybe this would teach me some humility. She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. My own daughter. 24 years old, and that's what she said to me. For a moment, I saw Clarissa not as my tormentor, not as the woman who'd made my life hell for 25 years, but as what she really was, a lonely, bitter woman whose own children barely knew her. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Don't, she snapped, straightening up. Don't you dare pity me. I don't need your pity. It's not pity, I said. It's just. I know what it's like to watch your child grow up in a world that doesn't always appreciate them. It hurts. You don't know anything about my relationship with my children. You're right, I agreed. I don't. But I know what it feels like to be afraid you've failed them somehow. Clarissa looked at me then, really looked at me, and for just a second, I saw something like understanding pass between us. Two mothers, both flawed, both trying in our own messed up ways. Then she got in her car, started the engine, and drove away without another word. Maya and I stood on the front steps and watched her disappear down the long driveway, past the perfectly manicured hedges and the fountain Richard had imported from Italy 20 years ago. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Maya asked. "Eventually," I said. "She's a survivor. She'll figure it out." "That's more generous than she deserves." "Maybe. But holding on to anger would just poison us." "She's gone. We won. That's enough." The first few days after Clarissa left were strange. The house felt enormous and empty, despite the remaining staff. Dorothy came back from her week off and found me sitting at the kitchen island, drinking coffee from one of the good china cups Clarissa never let me use. "Well," she said, looking me up and down. "I heard the news. Heard it from 3 different people at the grocery store, as a matter of fact. Whole town's talking about it." "I bet they are," I said. "What are they saying?" "Oh, the usual small-town nonsense. Some folks think you're a gold digger who trapped Mr. Vander Hoven. Others think you're a hero for standing up to Clarissa. Mrs. Peterson from the library said she always knew there was something between you and Richard, said she could tell by the way he looked at you at that fundraiser 5 years ago." "People see what they want to see," I said. Dorothy poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down next to me. "So what now? You planning to stay? To sell? To burn it all down and dance in the ashes?" I laughed at that. The dancing sounds tempting. But no. Maya wants to sell eventually. She's got plans. "That girl always did have plans," Dorothy said with approval. "She's got a good head on her shoulders. Takes after her mama." "And her father," I added quietly. "Yes," Dorothy agreed. "And her father. How is Richard, by the way? Any change?" I shook my head. "Still in a coma. The doctors say his brain activity is minimal. They don't think he's coming back. That's a shame. He was a complicated man, but he wasn't all bad. Better than most people gave him credit for." "He was a coward," I said. "But he loved his daughter. In the end, maybe that's what matters." Dorothy sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "You know what I think? I think Richard spent 30 years in a cage of his own making. Married to the wrong woman, trapped by expectations and appearances. Maya was probably the only truly free choice he ever made in his life. Maybe not the smartest choice, but at least it was real. I'd never thought of it that way, but she was right. Richard had been as trapped as I was, just in a different kind of prison." "I'm going to miss this place," Dorothy said, looking around the kitchen. 42 years I've been here. Started when the senior Mr. Vander Hoven was still alive. Saw Richard grow up, watched him bring Clarissa home as a bride, saw those children born. And now it's all ending." "You don't have to leave," I said quickly. "Maya wants everyone to stay. She's giving raises." "That's kind of her, but I'm 73 years old, Elena. It's time for me to retire. Go live with my daughter in Florida, spoil my grandkids. I've earned it." She was right, of course. But it still made me sad. Dorothy had been the closest thing to a friend I'd had in this house. "I'm going to miss you," I said. "I'll miss you too. But you don't need me anymore. You've got your daughter, you've got your freedom. Go live your life." She patted my hand. "And Elena? I'm proud of you. All those years, you held your head high even when that woman tried to grind you down. That takes strength. After Dorothy left, I walked through the house room by room. The formal dining room where I'd served thousands of meals I never ate. The library where Richard and I had our first real conversation. The sunroom where I'd catch Maya reading, curled up in a chair she wasn't supposed to sit in. The grand staircase I'd climbed countless times, always with cleaning supplies, always invisible. It was just a house, I told myself. Just walls and floors and expensive furnishings. But it had been my world for so long that I didn't quite know who I was without it defining me. Maya found me in the conservatory, standing among Clarissa's orchids, the ones I'd watered and misted and carefully maintained for years. "There you are," she said. "George called. He wants to meet tomorrow to go over some financial details. Apparently, the trust is more complicated than we thought." "How complicated?" "Well, in addition to this house, there's the investment portfolio. And Dad had shares in about a dozen companies. And there's real estate in the city, in the Berkshires, in Aspen. George says it's going to take months to sort everything out, but his rough estimate is that the total estate value is somewhere around $80 million. I had to sit down. $80 million. The number was so absurd, so incomprehensible, that it didn't even feel real. "That's not including whatever Clarissa gets," Maya continued. "She's entitled to the townhouse, the monthly allowance, and her personal accounts. But everything Richard put in the trust, all the real property, all the investments he made over the years, that's mine now." "Ours," she corrected quickly. "No," I said. "It's yours. Richard set it up for you." "Mom, don't be ridiculous. You think I'm going to live in luxury while you, what? Go back to cleaning houses? I've been cleaning houses for 25 years. I know how to do it. I'm good at it." Maya knelt in front of me, taking both my hands. "Listen to me. You spent a quarter century raising me in the shadows, protecting me, sacrificing for me. You let that woman humiliate you day after day because you thought it was the only way to keep me safe. Well, now it's my turn to take care of you. Maya. I'm serious. We're in this together. Whatever I have, you have. We're a team. We always have been." I pulled her into a hug and let myself cry. Not sad tears this time, but tears of relief. Of gratitude. Of exhaustion finally catching up with me. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, we're a team." 3 weeks after Richard's stroke, the hospital called. He'd died peacefully in his sleep, without ever regaining consciousness. Maya and I went to the hospital to say goodbye. Even though he was already gone, I needed to see him one last time. He looked smaller than I remembered, lying in that hospital bed. The powerful, charismatic man who'd swept me off my feet 26 years ago had been reduced to this pale, still figure. I held his hand, something I'd rarely been allowed to do when he was alive, and said goodbye to the father of my child, the man I'd loved in secret for so long. "Did you love him?" Maya asked me in the car on the way home. Really love him? I thought about that question. Had I loved Richard? Or had I just loved the idea of being seen by someone powerful, someone who could give me and my daughter a life we'd never have had otherwise? I loved who he was with me, I said finally. In those stolen moments when we could be honest with each other. But I'm not sure I ever really knew the whole man. He kept so much of himself locked away. Do you think he loved you? Yes, I said, and I believed it. Not enough to leave his wife, not enough to publicly acknowledge you, but in his own limited way, yes. He loved us as much as he was capable of loving anything. The funeral was small. Clarissa was there, wearing black Chanel and dark sunglasses, sitting in the front pew with Stephanie, Bradley, and Olivia. None of them had spoken to Maya or me since the day Clarissa left the estate. We sat in the back, like we'd always sat in the back of everything, and watched from a distance. Richard's business associates gave eulogies about his brilliance, his vision, his charitable work. His college roommate told funny stories about their youth. His sister spoke about how he'd helped raise her after their parents died. No one mentioned Maya. No one even glanced in our direction. It was as if we didn't exist. After the service, as people filed out toward the reception, Clarissa stopped by our pew. She looked at Maya for a long moment. "He would have been proud of you," she said quietly. "For what it's worth. He talked about your grades, your scholarship. He was proud, even if he never said it to your face." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for telling me that." Clarissa nodded and moved on. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't friendship. But it was something. A small acknowledgement that we'd all been caught up in something bigger and messier than any of us could handle. 2 months after the funeral, Maya made her decision about the estate. "I want to sell it all," she told me over breakfast one morning. "The Hamptons house, the Berkshire's place, the Aspen condo. I want to liquidate everything except a few key investments and the city townhouse." "That's a lot of money to let go of," I said carefully. "It's a lot of weight to carry," she corrected. "These places aren't home. They're just reminders of a life we were never really part of. I want to start fresh. Build something new." "What did you have in mind?" Her face lit up with excitement. "A foundation. For kids like me, children of domestic workers, the ones who grow up invisible in other people's houses. We'd provide scholarships, mentoring, college prep. Everything I had to fight for on my own, we'd give to them." "Maya, that's beautiful. And I want to buy us a house. A real house, not a mansion. Somewhere with good schools and friendly neighbors. Somewhere we can just be normal people." "Where were you thinking?" "Vermont, maybe. Or upstate New York. Somewhere with trees and fresh air and space to breathe. Somewhere you can have a garden if you want one, a garden you plant for yourself, not for someone else." 3 months later, we found it. A beautiful colonial in a small Vermont town, with 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen, and 2 acres of land. It cost less than 1% of what we sold the Hamptons estate for. We painted the walls colors we liked. We bought furniture that was comfortable instead of impressive. We planted a vegetable garden and got a dog, a golden retriever mix from the local shelter that Maya named Justice. I got used to waking up in a bedroom I'd chosen, to making coffee in my own kitchen, to walking across floors I'd never had to scrub. It took time to stop feeling like a guest in my own life, to believe that I deserved this, that it was really mine. Maya finished law school and passed the bar. She started the foundation, the Maya Elena Santos Foundation for Children of Domestic Workers. The applications poured in. Hundreds of kids, thousands eventually, whose parents cleaned houses or hotels or offices, who'd grown up invisible just like Maya had. We gave them scholarships. We gave them hope. As for Clarissa, I heard through the town grapevine that she'd adapted to her new life. She got a job, her first job ever, at 56 years old, as a consultant for a luxury events company. She was good at it, apparently. All those years of planning elaborate parties finally had a practical use. She dated a bit, traveled some, and according to Dorothy's daughter who saw her at a charity function, she seemed lighter somehow. Less bitter. Stephanie, Bradley, and Olivia turned out fine, more or less. Stephanie finally graduated college and started working in fashion. Bradley got sober after his third DUI and now runs a tech startup. Olivia became a social worker, of all things, working with underprivileged kids. Maybe Richard's death had been a wake-up call for all of them. Or maybe they just needed to grow up. Either way, they were finding their own paths, without their parents' money smoothing every rough edge. 1 year after we moved to Vermont, on a crisp October morning, Maya and I drove to New York for the Foundation's first annual gala. We'd rented a small ballroom, invited donors and supporters, and we were giving out our first round of scholarships to 10 deserving kids. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, I saw faces I never expected to see. Dorothy had flown up from Florida. George Henderson was there with his wife. Several of the former Hoven staff had come. And in the back row, wearing a simple black dress and no jewelry, sat Clarissa. Our eyes met across the room. She didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me beyond that brief eye contact. But she stayed for the whole event. She watched Maya give her speech about growing up invisible, about the importance of seeing and supporting children whose labor props up wealthy households. She watched as we awarded scholarships to 10 kids whose stories could have been Maya's story. And at the end of the night, as people were leaving, Clarissa came up to me. "That was a good thing you did tonight," she said. "Both of you. It's a good foundation." "Thank you," I said. "I'm surprised to see you here." "I was curious," she admitted. "Wanted to see what you'd do with it all. I half expected you to just live off the money, live in luxury. But this," she gestured around the room, "this is actually making a difference." "That's what Richard wanted," I said. "He wanted Maya to have opportunities. To help others have opportunities too." Clarissa was quiet for a moment. "Then, I was a terrible person to you. To both of you. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But I am sorry. For what it's worth." It was worth more than she knew. Not because I needed her apology to move on, I'd already moved on. But because it meant she'd learned something, grown somehow. And maybe that was its own kind of justice. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Elena? You were stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Stronger than I ever was." Then she was gone, disappearing into the New York night, and I never saw her again. Maya found me standing alone a few minutes later. Was that Clarissa I saw leaving? It was. What did she want? To apologize, I think. Or to make peace with herself. Maybe both. "Are you okay?" I thought about that question. Was I okay? I'd spent 25 years of my life serving people who didn't respect me, loving a man who couldn't claim me, raising a daughter in the shadows. I'd been fired, humiliated, dismissed. And now I stood in a ballroom in New York City, having just helped launch a foundation that would change hundreds of lives. I had a home I loved, a daughter I was proud of, and enough money that I'd never have to worry again. "Yeah," I said, pulling Maya close. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." 5 years later, the foundation has helped over 500 kids. Some of them have gone to Ivy League schools. Others have gone to trade schools, or community colleges, or started businesses. What matters is that they had choices, real choices, not just the ones left over after everyone else had taken what they wanted. I'm 53 now. I volunteer at the foundation 3 days a week. I garden. I read books in the middle of the afternoon without worrying about who needs me to clean something. I have friends who know my whole story and like me anyway. Maya met someone, a fellow attorney who grew up in a working-class family and understands where she came from. They're getting married next summer in our backyard, surrounded by the vegetables we grew and the flowers we planted. Sometimes I think about that morning when Clarissa fired me. When she stood at the top of those marble stairs and called my daughter garbage. When she thought she was throwing out the trash. She was right, in a way. She was throwing something out. But it wasn't us. She was throwing out her last chance to be a decent human being. Her last chance to choose kindness over cruelty. And in doing so, she threw away any claim to the life she thought was hers. I'm not glad Richard had a stroke. I'm not glad he died without ever meeting his daughter as an adult, without ever getting to tell her he was proud. That was a tragedy for all of us. But I am glad that in his final years, he made a choice. He chose to protect his daughter. He chose to make sure that the woman who'd spent decades belittling us couldn't destroy us when he was gone. He chose, finally, to do the right thing. And that choice gave Maya and me a chance to build something real. Not a life in the shadows. Not a life of service to people who saw us as furniture. But a real life. Our own life. If you're watching this, if you're reading this, and you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been treated like you don't matter, like you're disposable, like you're less than, I want you to know something. You're not. You matter. Your story matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe finds a way to remind the people who forgot that. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, subscribe and share your own story in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And remember, when you treat people like garbage, don't be surprised when the garbage takes itself out. And don't be shocked if that garbage turns out to be made of gold.